My son didn't respect me, so I made him regret it. I'm not sure where to even start with this, but I need to get it off my chest. I'm a 42-year-old single mom, and my son, who's 17, has completely stopped respecting me. And, honestly, it breaks my heart. I've always tried to be the best mom I could. His dad left when he was a little boy, and I made the choice to stay home to raise him. I figured that if I focused on being present for him, giving him everything he needed, that it would be enough. I cooked, cleaned, did laundry, and made sure everything in his life was as smooth as possible. I gave him everything I had. There were days I felt like I was running on empty, but I never complained. Being a mom was my whole world. I loved the idea of being there for him, even if it meant sacrificing my own ambitions and goals. I wanted him to feel safe and cared for, to know he was always number one in my life. And for a while, it felt like that was working. He was a good kid, respectful and sweet, and we had fun together, playing video games, watching movies, having little inside jokes. It felt like we were a team, just the two of us, against the world. But as he got older, something shifted. It didn't happen overnight, but slowly, piece by piece, he started to look down on me. He'd make comments about how I just stayed home and how I was lazy for not having a job outside the house. At first, I didn't take it too seriously. I assumed it was just teenage angst, the way they sometimes lash out at the people they're closest to. But as time went on, his words grew sharper, and his attitude more dismissive. I remember one night he came home late from school, and he looked at the dinner I made, sighed, and said, "I don't know why you bother. It's not like you have a job or anything." It stung. I hadn't been just staying home. I had been building the life he lived, making sure everything was taken care of so he could focus on being a kid, and then a teenager, without the stress of adult responsibilities hanging over him. But to him, it was as if all of it didn't matter. It was like nothing I did mattered anymore. He would leave dirty dishes everywhere, toss his clothes around the house like I was his personal maid. And when I asked him to help out, he would give me attitude, talk back, or refuse outright. It was exhausting, but I kept trying. I kept hoping that the kid I used to know would come back. The worst part was when I started to feel like I was invisible to him. I would be in the kitchen preparing dinner, and he'd walk right past me, absorbed in his phone, not even saying hello. He'd sit in his room for hours, hardly acknowledging my existence unless it was to complain about something trivial, like not having enough snacks or his laundry not being done. I would hear him talking to his friends on the phone, laughing and joking, but when I asked him how his day went or if he needed anything, he'd give me a short, irritated response. It felt like I was just some inconvenience in his life, a person who existed solely to make sure his world ran smoothly without ever receiving any of the care or respect in return. And then, one day, everything changed. He hit me. It happened so quickly that I didn't know what to do. He was furious over something small, probably because I'd asked him to clean up his mess, and the next thing I knew, he was standing there, yelling at me, his face twisted in anger. In the heat of the moment, he shoved me hard, and then his hand flew, and he slapped me across the face. I stood there, in complete shock, staring at the boy I had raised. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't even process what had just happened. The only thing I could think was that this wasn't my son. This wasn't the kid I'd poured all my love and care into for the past 17 years. This was someone else. A stranger. I cried that night. A lot. But it wasn't just from the physical pain. It was the emotional devastation of realizing that I had let it get this far. I had spent years doing everything for him, giving him everything I had, and had let him walk all over me, without holding him accountable. The thought that I had allowed him to treat me like that, it broke my heart. But something in me snapped that night, and I knew I couldn't let this go on anymore. I decided to make a change. I realized that I had been enabling him, that my desire to protect him and make his life easy had caused him to lose sight of the fact that he needed to respect me. So, I stopped. I stopped doing everything for him. No more cooking his meals, no more laundry, no more cleaning up after him. If he wanted a clean house, he was going to have to clean it himself. If he wanted food, he was going to have to cook it. And if he wanted clean clothes, he would need to do his own laundry. At first, he didn't notice, or maybe he thought I was just being moody or lazy, which was his favorite insult these days. He went about his usual routine, not realizing that there was no food in the fridge, that the laundry was piling up, and that the dishes were starting to look like a disaster zone. But eventually, he started to notice. After a couple of days, he was running out of clean clothes and had nothing to eat but cereal and chips. He came home from school one day, visibly frustrated, and demanded that I get back to doing my job. I calmly told him, "If you can't respect me, you can't expect me to do anything for you." That's when the real argument started. He yelled, called me lazy again, and stormed off, slamming his bedroom door so hard the whole house shook. But I didn't back down. The next few days were a disaster for him. He couldn't figure out how to cook anything that wasn't a sandwich or cereal, so that's what he ate for dinner. His clothes piled up in a corner, and he was forced to wear the same outfit to school 2 days in a row, which I knew embarrassed him. His friends came over, and the house wasn't spotless like it usually was. The look on his face when they noticed the mess? It was priceless. I could tell he was starting to realize that running a household wasn't as simple as it seemed. Finally, he came to me, not with the usual anger in his voice, but with a tired, frustrated tone. "Mom," he said, "why aren't you doing anything? You're supposed to take care of the house." That's when I finally let him have it. I told him that he had no idea how hard I worked, how much I did every day to make sure his life was easy. He just assumed things got done magically, without realizing the sacrifices I made to keep our lives running smoothly. I told him that being a housewife doesn't mean I'm lazy. It doesn't mean I don't work just as hard as anyone who brings home a paycheck. I worked harder than most people, because my job never ended. There was always something to clean, something to cook, something to fix. And that was fine, I had done it willingly, because it was my job as a mom. But I wasn't going to keep doing it if he didn't start respecting me. He stood there, quiet for a moment, like a switch had flipped in his head. I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes, but it was fleeting. He didn't say much at first, but he finally muttered, "I didn't know it was so hard." It was the first time in months that I saw any real remorse in him. I could tell he was embarrassed, maybe even ashamed, but I didn't let him off the hook easily. I told him that respect isn't just something you say in an apology, it's something you show every day, through your actions and words. And I made him promise that he would work harder to appreciate me. That night, for the first time in years, he apologized. He told me he was sorry for hitting me, for being disrespectful, for not appreciating everything I did. He looked genuinely remorseful. I didn't hug him or forgive him right away, though. I told him that it would take time for me to trust that he meant what he said. But I could see that he was starting to understand. Since then, things have been better. He started helping around the house, doing his own laundry, and even cooking a couple of meals. It hasn't been perfect, of course, he's still a teenager, and he still has his moments where he slips into that cocky, entitled attitude. But overall, I think he's finally starting to see me as his mom again, not just someone to clean up after him. He's realizing that the life we have is a result of both of our efforts, not just mine. But more than that, I think he's starting to see the person I am, beyond just the mom who does everything for him. And I'm starting to see him in a different light, too. Over the past few months, I've noticed that his attitude toward me, and even toward others, has changed. He's become more considerate of how his actions affect people. When he gets upset or frustrated, he doesn't lash out as much. He talks about his feelings more, and when he can't figure something out on.
Comments. Conscious_feed_7876. You need to get a life of your own. Seems he is growing up and you're smothering him and he doesn't know how to get space from you. Get professional help. His behavior is unacceptable, but he is a child and doesn't have the tools to express he wants independence. You need to back off. Accomplished pin 775. How did you become a stay-at-home mom after the father left? I'm just confused there. No hate, did he pay some crazy amounts of child support or something? Always falling 2000. Your son is the typical spoiled kid. Nice work. Sweaty Fatmas. Don't care how old his son is. If he hits my wife, he's gonna get the belt. And if he's gonna cry to the cops, I'm gonna leave him at the fire station.